Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Programs broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Wednesday, August 18th, 2021. This was requested by our admissions team because they get so many questions about what happens in the wilderness during the summertime. What's different? With that, I'm going to tell you again, I told you before we started broadcasting tonight that you're welcome to submit any questions on topic or off topic. As always, I'm going to try to broaden the message, broaden the topic tonight to include things that don't have to do simply with the content, with the surface level content. In fact, when I was preparing the broadcast, I went to the webinar I did that I often do in the winter time because I think a lot of people are more concerned about what happens in the winter time and around the holidays. But in a lot of ways, the message tonight is that the wilderness and the seasons have their own challenges, right? That whether it's really cold or really hot or really raining or windy, there's always a challenge in the wilderness. And so I'm going to talk about that idea, about what it teaches us, maybe even a little bit about the spiritual aspect of aligning ourselves with nature and wilderness as we go. So with that idea, let's get right into it. One of my very favorite quotes about wilderness is this quote from Andy Goldsworthy that says, "The goal of life is to make your heartbeat match the beat of the universe, to match your nature with nature." Actually, that's Joseph Campbell that said that, not Andy Goldsworthy. Andy talked about how our nature, that when we talk about being disconnected from nature, that we are talking about a disconnection from ourselves because we are nature. And so by observing, by sitting in the wilderness, in the ocean, at the beach, by unplugging ourselves, by not distracting ourselves, so much of our life and our technology these days allows us to distract ourselves from being present. So as I always talk about, there's a mindfulness component that happens in wilderness. And so observing and watching and sitting in nature can get us in touch with our own nature. I talk about this idea that every season has its scourge or its challenge. Joseph Campbell taught that opportunities to find powers within ourselves come when life seems most challenging. Even as I discussed last week when talking about something completely different, talking about wilderness, how to talk to wilderness, about wilderness to your family and friends, I mentioned that NASA uses desert camping and wilderness camping to mimic the conditions that will happen in space. And in a way, you can almost not think of two more different kinds of conditions than being out in the Utah or Oregon wilderness and being in a space station or a rocket. Right? One is completely surrounded by technology, metal, everything is human man-made, at least in your immediate surrounding. And of course, out in nature, it's just the opposite. Everything is natural. But there's something about that that's the same. You're left to cope. You're left to deal with yourself. You're left to have to problem solve. You're left to, I've never, of course, most of us have never been on a rocket, nor will we ever be on a rocket. But there's a powerlessness to it that we have to pay attention to. Something I love from the letters of Juliet. Juliet was the fictional character in The Knight in Rusty Armor. She was the wife, and my therapist wrote a sequel to The Knight in Rusty Armor. And just like her husband, she went into the forest, into the wilderness. And remember, in storytelling, a lot of storytelling is about going into the unknown, going into the place that is dark, the place that is uncomfortable. It could be the deep ocean, could be the dark cave, could be the dark and ominous forest. And when she was at her wit's end, when she was about ready to give up, she rested. And she said, "Day after day, I sat by the stream watching it dance in the sunlight, in the moonlight. I watched the earth in its richness like an open hand, and I wanted to be like that earth myself, the field that holds up life, upon which life depends. After a while, it came to me. Nothing in this place had final control, was able to control life. There was no real power but the thread of life within, behind it all. We can learn something by watching nature, by sitting and learning from, by being still. Oftentimes in storytelling, you'll talk about looking into the water to find yourself. And really what you're looking in is symbolically, is you're looking into your unconscious. You're looking for your reflection literally, but you're looking to find the things that are buried beneath it. When you look into water, a body of water, it's distorted. You can see lights, you can see shapes and images, but you don't see everything clearly, unless, of course, you get into it and under it. And water also becomes the source of life. That happens in the letters of Juliet. She compares or uses the water. She talks about gaining a thirst from the streams fed by the mountain heights. And that becomes a metaphor for looking for the truth, for wanting the truth. So everything in our nature, everything in our wandering, everything in our looking can lead us back to ourselves, can lead us back to our own understanding. I wrote this in The Journey of the Heroic Parent. Wilderness therapy teaches that within the context of struggling to survive, a person learns who he is, what it means to belong, and what it means to be interdependent. Within the wilderness context, one learns values. If you choose to make a fire, you'll be cold. If you choose not to make a fire, you'll be cold and unable to eat a hot meal. If you aren't careful when building your shelter, you may have an uncomfortable night of sleep. In situations like this, truths about preparation, patience, and organizations are inescapable. I've told the story that when I went out to the wilderness with my son, it was in February. It was cool, but not freezing. And when I was out there, it rained for the day and a half that I was out there. Remember, I was at the time working as a wilderness therapist, the founder or the co-founder of Evoke Therapy Program. So I had experience, a lot of it in the wilderness. But I remember specifically being frustrated with the rain because I thought to myself, it's getting in the way of the therapy. But like I would teach or talk to a client, I reminded myself after I had that thought, this is the therapy. I'm not in control. And I have to cope with it. I've told the story about being in a fall rainstorm and threatening to the staff that I was going to do the sessions in my car because I was so frustrated with the challenge to build a fire inside of a shelter. Then you have to deal with the smoke in your eyes. And you couldn't really have a fire outside because the rain was too heavy. And if you didn't have a fire inside of your shelter, you were too cold. And I said to Stephen, the staff, I said, Stephen, I'll give you 5 minutes to talk me out of having sessions for the rest of the day in my car. And he didn't need 5 minutes. He needed one sentence. He said, Brad, I would just encourage you to show the kids how to suffer, how to feel and deal with things that are outside of your control. Sometimes when I think about even the title of tonight's broadcast, which is Wilderness in the Summer, sometimes I substitute life for the word wilderness because it really is just life in the summer. The winter story that I tell about taking the Boy Scouts up into the mountains in the middle of winter, camping on top of 5 feet of snow, and being so frustrated with keeping them organized, like herding a herd of cats. And at the end of a long and freezing cold day, saying to the person that was helping me, that was one of my staff from where I work, because I needed that help, I said, I don't know how you do this. I don't know how, not only do you do this when you're working, but then on your off shift, you'll go out and camp alone. And he said, without fanfare, I don't think it gets any more real than this. This is life. The very first staff member to explain wilderness therapy to me in the spring of 1996, when I was asking, why is therapy outside? Why are we doing it with backpacks on, with hiking and camping 5 days a week and only therapy 2 days a week? And he said to me, because we're teaching the kids to live on the ground, to be present, to have to deal with life instead of living what he said, where most people live, which is off the ground. Of course, all of these are poetic phrases, but it's this idea about dealing with what you can't control, dealing with the elements. And while many of us would prefer summer over winter, it can be really hot. There could be bugs, mosquitoes, right? It can be inescapably uncomfortable. I'll talk about the safety issues in just a moment, but it has its challenges and it has its scourge. Like I've said, wilderness therapy, the biggest misunderstanding in our culture about wilderness therapy is that it's fundamentally different from doing it inside of a house or inside of a hospital or inside of a school. It's the same theories and therapy. It's just that the way that we deliver it, how it is delivered, is through or on top of living in the wilderness. In our version of wilderness therapy, which we call primitive living, nomadic living, which means we're not in cabins, we're not going back to a base camp, and we're hiking from place to place. All of the issues come up. And when you add the elements, I say this all the time, Mother Nature doesn't negotiate. She can't be bargained with. She can't be manipulated. And you can't escape her lessons. And so when you have children who don't think that they need therapy, who don't think that they have problems, wilderness does the teaching. You can, even the ones that are therapy savvy, that can read well, that can fill out workbooks well, that can write wonderful letters, that can show up in sessions with me or another therapist with inspiring insights, making powerful connections. What we watch for is, what does it look like when you're struggling to make a fire in the morning? What does it look like when you're all struggling to collect wood and seeing who's doing their fair share? And how do you communicate about that? How do you problem solve when 2 out of the 8 group members don't want to work and are taking a stance? How do you deal with the fact that a storm comes upon us and we have to sit in our shelters in lightning drills with lightning safety drills for 4 or 5 hours? We don't create that experience. It's similar to when your children go away from home, off to college, into the military, on a trip. They move away or grow up or for some other reason move out of the house. The lessons aren't about you. Because adolescence, 13 to 25, because adolescence, the task in adolescence, for most developmental psychologists, we think of it as forming your identity. The inclination to reject parental values and lessons becomes a part of that identity formation. You know, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You're at times the person that they're least receptive to in terms of giving advice. Part of that is because you're their parent and it's natural for them to push against the authority. And part of that is the way that we try to control our children. But the fact of the matter is, once they get away from us and out there, it ceases to be about us. Now it's about life. There are safety concerns, hydration, dehydration, heat exhaustion in the wilderness, sun damage, mosquitoes, and like it is all the time, safety first. When I talk and teach the staff in our earned services, we do this on a weekly basis. We rotate who's teaching them. But when I do this, I explain taking care of their lips, protecting them from the sun and from dryness is the therapy. Yeah, we could talk about schoolwork at home or chores at home or violating family rules or substance abuse or eating disorders or something. We could talk about those things, but they're going to be pretty resistant to that because, again, they have an investment in not having a problem and therefore not needing to be here, having this be an overreaction. But when we talk about them not hydrating, not wearing sunscreen, not wearing their sun hats, not taking care of their skin when it comes to mosquito repellent, itching and dealing with a mosquito bite, and the role that a staff member plays at managing and coaching and teaching and holding accountability for those things, it's the exact same process that's going at home with school and rules and chores. But because we've shifted the subject a little bit, it can have a little bit of a work around their resistance, because they don't have an identity formation around sunscreens, right? Around, at least not at home, where I'm wearing sunscreen. And so when we say to them, you're struggling with hygiene, you're struggling with taking care of your gear, you're struggling with protecting yourself from the sun and staying hydrated, you can argue about that, but there's really not a good position to take against those things. You're doing what you did at home, which is to cut off your nose to spite your face. Yeah, I understand you felt oppressed. I understand that part of identity formation is challenging the status quo and challenging authority, but the sun doesn't care. The heat doesn't care. We definitely adjust our hiking schedule in the summer. We have temperature limits in the summertime also, that we do not hike, just like we do in the winter, where we don't hike when it's under a certain temperature. And in the winter, in the case of the winter, we have them go to places where there's a wall tent or a wood burning stove, right? Some makeshift shelter out there. In the summertime, we stay in the shade during the day. We work on assignments, and then we'll hike in the morning, in the cool of the morning, or in the cool of the evening. It is just as challenging and frustrating. In fact, one of my complaints about wilderness programming, about our wilderness program, is when the weather is perfect, it's almost too easy. And you all know this. In society, I assume everybody knows this, maybe you don't, but in society, crime goes up when it's hot. Crime decreases when temperatures are cool. I don't know if you know that or not, but I believe it's universal in all cultures. People get frustrated. People get irritated. And so the heat and the sun becomes a triggering event for them. And instead of helping them sort through how you're going to deal with it when you think your parent is nagging, we're going to talk to them about the nagging sun. How do you cope with it? And the staff, again, as I talk about often, the staff are amazing models of dealing with this. I mean, these are people who have signed up to live outdoors for 8 days in a row, every other week, for months and years on end. And because of that, they've developed a psychological and emotional resilience to all the seasons and all the challenges. And they love overcoming them. So just like we have them, just like we're monitoring their bathing and their hygiene and their oral hygiene, we're watching their sun hat, their sunscreen. Are they taking precautions for mosquitoes, lip balm, dry skin, etc.? The cultural differences in the summer are interesting. It can feel like, because there are mild days during the summer, it can take on a tone of summer camp. In winter, even for a certain period of time, there's just no escaping the fact that it's colder, that there's snow, and you have to deal with it. But there are mild days in the summer, although this summer was especially warm. And so sometimes, for two reasons, children can fall into that summer camp mentality. Number one, parents waited to send them until school was out. So they start to associate that with going away to summer camp. And two, like I said, it's a little bit easier at times. I used to say that I liked wilderness in the winter better because it's more difficult, but as I've gotten older, I hate the summer more than I hate the winter. I'm more challenged by it, and some of that has to do with my own health concerns. So at times we challenge them and we push them to not just sit there and relax, but to dive into their work. You're going to be a part of that by the letters that you write, by the phone calls that you have. I suppose for a lot of you, if you like warmer weather better, your field visits, your mid-program and end-of-program visits might be a little bit more tolerable for you. You might be a little bit more in your element. There's a risk. Obviously, I believe in school. I have a PhD. My wife has a master's degree. My firstborn has a master's degree. My daughter's finishing her clinical psych PhD. I have a child that's a sophomore in college and then a child that's 13. It's a value in the Reedy family that school is important. I think that education, just the fact of teaching people to read. I was talking to my therapist a few months back about some of the societal and cultural changes, and she pointed out to me somewhere in the low 20s percentile of people in the United States can't read. Adults can't read. And first we have to get people read. How are you going to make a nuanced point or argument about something if people can't read for themselves and consider the issues? So education, in my mind, is important and vital, but we don't want to put the cart before the horse. We don't want to put it at such a priority that mental health becomes secondary. Even in the past couple of years, I've seen the dialogue change in our culture, where people are realizing with the athletes that are out there, right, that are talking about their mental health, and that success in an athletic event, or even pay for attending a post-game press conference. They're willing to sacrifice their pay to prioritize their mental health. And in a way, that's the challenge that we have as parents. We want to value education. Every parent I think I've ever met values education, wants their child to have as much of it as possible, and sees it as a benefit. And it can eclipse mental health. Part of it is because we don't know about mental health. We're not taught about mental health. We don't know what it looks like as much, so we don't recognize it. Its flaws, the cracks in our child's mental health. Part of it is because we haven't addressed our own mental health adequately. Part of it is because the training from previous cultures, the talking about mental health or addressing mental health, there's such a stigma associated with it. Parents will often ask me, doesn't apply, I assume, to some of you, although it could based on the child's length of stay. I mean, it also depends if you're listening to this as a recording next spring or a podcast. People will say, should I wait for the school year to end? And like every should question, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, there's no clear answer. How important is it? Does it send a more impactful message to send your child to a program like ours during the school year, before the semester ends? When I was a little kid, one of my athletic heroes was Bjorn Borg. If you're around my age, you'll remember him if you liked sports or tennis at all. And he told the story about having his tennis racket after he threw a tantrum, having his tennis racket get taken away for I think it was a couple of months. I don't remember the time frame specifically. But I remember as a young child hearing that experience and realizing how much more his father, his parents, placed an emphasis on his mental health than they did his success as a tennis star. Bjorn Borg did have emotional health problems later on in life, but the one thing that never showed up in his game for the most part was losing control. He never threw the tantrums, never argued, never put on those kinds of displays. So is it important to send that message? I know I don't want people to follow my example as a teenager. I didn't set a good example, but I dropped out of high school because my mental health got in the way. Years later, I went back, eventually went and got into college through some help from a friend, and then graduated with a PhD, and it worked out. I didn't start college until I was 21. We have all these preconceived ideas about the time frame, about when things are supposed to happen. Gap years can be helpful. A gap year is kind of a journey into the wilderness, metaphorically speaking, to find yourself. A lot of professors told me, and I found this with my daughter too, they don't want you to go bachelor's degree straight into an advanced degree in psychology. It's very rare that that's their preference at all. They want you to have some experience and some time, ideally. We want to do it as students to get through it and get on with life and start our career. But they're asking and suggesting that people slow down to discover themselves. So wilderness is this literal and metaphorical place that we wander around to find ourselves. As Joseph Campbell, the philosopher, or the expert mythologist teaches us, we wander into the forest looking for something. We're willing to go into the desert to look for something. And many times we don't find the thing that we're looking for, but what we find is a deeper, more authentic version of ourselves, a bigger version of ourselves. And so those metaphors, they're virtually in all of our movies and all of our myths. I'm more familiar with Judeo-Christian teachings, but the Buddha is the same. He found nirvana. He found himself under a tree. In the New Testament, Jesus went out into the desert for 40 days. In the Old Testament, the Jews wandered for 40 years. And all of these stories are about finding a deeper version, meeting challenges, waiting, listening, and discovering yourself. I assume I don't have to sell this idea to the people that listen to these webinars and these podcasts. But it's not just an accident. Even last week, I was in the wilderness sitting with some parents, and they'd only been there a couple of hours, and their cell phone, they lost service about an hour and a half before they got to the group. And they were telling me it feels different. I can feel my nervous system relaxing, my perspective changing. Wilderness is a digital detox. Nothing can be taken for granted, not just in the winter, but in the summer also. Length of stay can be affected by summertime. Mostly parents, I'll be clear about this, mostly parents are wanting to get their kids back into school at a certain time in the fall. So there's a couple of things with that. Number one, therapeutic programs don't have a traditional schedule. It's year-round. It's credit recovery, which means they help children make up credit for what was lost. But it also means that there's going to be a bottleneck in August, where we are right now, with admissions. And I know it can be frustrating to have to deal with that reality, but it is a reality. So it can affect the length of stay one way or the other. And you can have a conversation with your therapist about that. You're measuring kind of a few things against each other. Is leaving early so that I can meet some kind of traditional schedule important? Would it be helpful if I extended it a little bit? If we can't find a place because there's a bottleneck at the second half of August, is it worth an extra extended period of time? I said this to the group last week. I said this to some therapists I was talking to in our program today. Wilderness is a small, safe box. Incredibly therapeutically supported. And so when I say child, I mean your child, the child in the program, any age, 13 to 30. When a child is doing well in wilderness, that's wonderful. That's what we hope for. But we should remind ourselves that it's a small, safe box. I've told you stories before about children will tell you that in a different way, wilderness is the easiest and freest place they've ever felt in their life. When they're with us, they want to get back to regular life. They want to be a normal person. But you and I know that being normal is not all it's cracked up to be. And some of the struggles are suggesting that they need something different. That whatever mainstream is offering them isn't enough or isn't the right thing, so they need something completely different. One of the most common questions is what happens after wilderness? Should they go back to school in the fall? To a mainstream school? It is our job, of course, as professionals to make recommendations on what we see diagnostically and prognostically. That's part of our responsibility. That's part of our training. That's part of why your child is with us. But like all questions that you ask, should doesn't make any sense. I remember deciding 20 years ago at our program, telling the staff, I would love to see the word should disappear. I went farther to say should, shouldn't, ought to, must, need to, have to, good, bad, right, wrong, evil. I extended the list longer, but should is kind of the gold standard of all of those imperative words. It doesn't make sense anymore. I was telling the students last week that it's not their purpose in life. They have to figure that out. But what I've decided my purpose in life is to be who I am, to discover who I am authentically, and to be that person. Out of that comes my boundaries. Out of that comes my purpose. Out of that comes the greatest amount of love. And should is the enemy of finding yourself. Should is the opposite. So when I get asked the question, I of course teach that I can't answer a should question. It doesn't even make sense to me. But I say to folks, let's talk not just about the what. What should you do after Evoke, but why? That's the magic. That's the gold. If you're doing something from a place of love, authenticity, bravery, courage, you can't get it wrong. And if you're doing something from a place of fear, anger, and control, you can't get it right. So there's a different sensibility in therapy. There's a different way of being. It's a shift from what should I do to what's true for me? What do I need? And so when a parent says, I'm going to take my kid home because I feel guilty, I'm going to challenge that like crazy. I'm going to talk about the pitfalls of being led by your guilt, not only for you, but how harmful it is to your child to make decisions from a place of guilt and shame and fear. And the lie that those emotions tell you. It's a slippery slope, and you'll never find your footing from that foundation. It's the shift, like I talk about in The Audacity to Be You, between being right and good to being a self. So we have to fight should energy. We have to get rid of should energy in order to find out who we are. I already talked about the effects of placements at the end of the summer and how every program that is therapeutic works on credit recovery. I know everybody wants to fit back into the mainstream and to graduate with their graduating class. Parents are worried that the child will feel ashamed. You will never solve the problem of shame. You will never solve the problem of shame in your life or in your child's life. You can never help solve it, and they can never solve it by being good. I talked about this. In fact, somebody asked this question the other day, and the last broadcast, and we didn't get to it, about Simone Biles. And I explained I have no problem with what Simone Biles did or needed to do. And she has my full love and support as a human being on earth. And the fact that she needed to quit for her mental and physical health, because if you follow the story, her anxiety was such that she was going to probably hurt herself if she continued competing. She wasn't a hero for quitting. Just like your son is not a hero for stealing or for doing opiates, or your daughter is not a hero for cutting on herself or for restrictive eating. They're not heroes for their fallibilities. They're just humans. Now, Simone is heroic when she talks about it, when she talks about something difficult, when she owns that it was a mental health issue, when she advocates for mental health as a priority. Those are heroic, courageous acts. But failure is not heroic. Failure is human and inevitable. And it's really a narcissistic wounding when we substitute love and connection and affection with praise and admiration. So if Simone was my client walking into my room and she said, Brad, I had to quit, I would say, I get it. I'm sure that was really hard and really hard to admit. And the fact that you talked about why, that's incredibly brave. But the act of quitting, the act of failing, the act of mental health symptom, the struggle is just a matter of being human. Shame is cured not when we believe or convince or accomplish or become great or convince the world that we're great. That's not how shame is cured. That actually can feed into it just as much. Shame is cured, and I'm using very simplistic language. Shame is cured or resolved when we are allowed to be ourselves and loved and valued anyway. When we get out of contingent love and contingent affection. And so the narrative around Simone's quitting being heroic, it's a nuanced conversation, of course. That was the problem that I had with it, but it wasn't being talked about by mental health professionals. It was being talked about by the public because people don't know how to respond to it. They don't know that it's okay to fail. In the Journey of the Heroic Parent, there's a poster that I share. If you flip through it, you'll see it from a piece of art that my therapist created that sat on her wall for 10 years. And the title of it is called Words of Higher Enlightenment. And it says, fail, give up, flop, surrender, fizzle. To be enlightened is not to be great. To be enlightened is to be you. Right? When I saw the Dalai Lama spoke, he constantly, in a playful way, made self-deprecating comments. He's trying to show people it's okay to, that's what we're treating you guys. That's what we're treating in you. You want to know what the end looks like or the other side looks like? It looks like learning to love your horrible, rotten self, your imperfections, your fallibility. I know it's nice for people to say, well, you're a good mother, you're a good father, you're a good enough mother, you're a good enough father. One of the students said to me in the wilderness last week, I was explaining some of this, talking about you all, and a young adult woman said to me, a young adult client woman said to me, well, we're going to do better than our parents. And I said, I know that makes you feel better, and it's probably true. You're probably right. And your parents probably did better than their parents. I'm sure they did, in almost all cases. But at some point, you're going to have to look in the mirror and realize that you've failed. Big or small, often or not. And learn to forgive yourself and learn That yes, you dented your child, and now the dents are theirs. But if you need to be good, this is kind of the secret to the universe. It really is. And I know I'm not talking about summertime right now, but that's what happens. The secret is learning to be okay with your fallible, imperfect, flawed human self. Learning to accept it. Learning that your worth isn't contingent on how pretty you are, or handsome you are, or smart you are, or successful you are, or how good your kids are, or how many albums you've sold, or the letters that come after your name, or the title that comes before your name at work. The real freedom as a human being and a parent is discovering who you are and feeling safe enough and okay enough to be that person. So, back to where I got off onto this. When a child has to change his or her or their trajectory in college or school or graduation, it's okay. I understand the urge for them wanting to fit in or hide within the mainstream. I don't recommend children to go to therapeutic schools and programs and to delay the reentry into mainstream because I'm trying to punish them or show them that they have shame. That's not why we do it, but I'm willing to do it because it's okay. And when they say, I feel strange, I want to be normal, I can empathize. I don't lecture. I don't teach them what I've just taught you for the past 10 minutes. So the choices that you make, if they're fueled by this idea to protect them because you don't want them to feel ashamed, I understand it. It won't be the cure. It'll actually be part of the problem. Therapy schools and programs don't adhere to traditional seasonal schedules because their priority is your child's mental health. And your child's mental health doesn't line up. Just like Simone Biles's anxiety didn't line up. And who wouldn't have anxiety? She was crowned as the greatest Olympic athlete of all time before she even performed her first event this year. And the only thing she could do was come up short. The only thing that Simone could do was either meet expectations, which would have been a relief, I'm sure, or come in second place, which was a failure. So all of this model, all of what we're talking about, wilderness therapy, going during the summertime, deciding if you want to wait till school ends, deciding if you need to get your child back into a traditional schedule, all of this relates to our shame. All of this relates to our children's shame. And so part of the higher level of consciousness that you're invited into is to think and hear of different ideas, to think about, to look at things from a different perspective. Group sizes will be affected in the summertime. Group sizes are our largest at the beginning of summer because many people wait, and they are the smallest at the second half of August and into September. And again, one is not better than the other. They're just different. This is something I've learned about choices. Learned about the question of should. What should I do? Should I get married? Should I get divorced? Should I change the job? Should I take my child home? Should I keep them in a school? They're complaining. The response is it will be different. If I changed my career today from being a therapist and I went back to school to become a chemical engineer, my life would be different. If I got divorced, my life would be different. If I stay married, my life will be different. But we're so used to trying to find the good thing and the solution to win the game. So many people come to therapy hoping that the therapist will help them find a winning path. And the winning path, the winning path we want you to find at Evoke? We want you to find your serenity, your peace of mind, your deeper or higher version of yourself. That's the goal. That's the difference at Evoke. Yes, we're going to treat your child. We want them to find that too. But since you can't control that and I can't control that, let's work on you. Which, by the way, is the exact same thing I say to them when I'm talking to them. We can't change your parents. They're probably going to be crazy for the rest of their lives. It's really hard to change when you're 40 or 50 years old. So, since we can't control mom and dad, what are you going to do? What is your work? A good example for a parent worrying about guilt is many parents feel guilty for robbing the child of their summer. Or in the winter, it's the holidays, or it could be their birthday, or it could be a family reunion or a wedding. We don't do those things to punish them. When I sent my son to Willer's, he went the day before Halloween, so missing Halloween wasn't a big thing, but he missed Halloween, Thanksgiving, the December holiday that we celebrate, the New Year, and his birthday. I didn't do it on purpose for that timing. But that's a part of it. And it was very clear to him that I was unwavering in my commitment for the intervention. I know that they want to be a regular kid. I know that's a need that children have. I get it. I want to hide too. I don't want to stand out at times. And just like you, I have to take little steps out into the open or into the darkness, depending upon which metaphor, what style you prefer. Joseph Campbell said, "You enter the forest at the darkest point." Just like you did when you sent your child to Evoke. Most of you had a friend or a professional that you trusted recommend it. So you took the step or the leap. It's really a step, but it feels like a leap into the abyss, right? You took that step or that leap. You enter the forest at the darkest point where there is no path. Where there is a way or a path, it is someone else's path. And you are not on your own path. If you do parenting well, most people will think you're doing it wrong. You need to hear that. If you do parenting well, most people will think you're doing it wrong. I want to say one more thing that is almost completely off topic, but came to me today. I spend a lot of time teaching in these broadcasts, working with my private clients, teaching our therapists, teaching our clients at Evoke. I spend a lot of time talking about the capacity to hold space for a child that's struggling. The ability to, I say, be like the Buddha, be like the Christ, be like the Yoda. And when a parent was talking about that with me recently, and she said, I always ask myself, how would the Buddha see my child? How would the Buddha see my spouse? I said to her, you know what? I've never said this before, but you know what the Buddha would do first? The Buddha would go meditate. They would leave the room in many cases. They would say, I'll be back, but I have to go meditate and find myself again. So when you hear me talk about developing the capacity to see your children like you have the mindset of a Mother Teresa, of somebody compassionate and understanding, like Sigmund Freud might be able to see somebody, without judgment, just descriptively, like the Buddha or the Christ, Muhammad. Pick your role model, your hero. Know this: in many cases, the first thing that hero would do would be to go somewhere to pray or to meditate, to fill up their cup before they returned, so they had something to offer. I'll be right back. I can't listen to this now. I'm going to go get some food spiritually, emotionally. And then after that, to come back and to say, I'm here now. I can listen. Talk to me. I want to hear of your pain and your anger, especially the pain and anger that's directed at me. And I want to hear it and see the world and the situation through your eyes. And meet it with loving kindness and non-judgment and curiosity. The invitation, it's automatic as you do this work, but if it's not automatic, and it won't be in moments of stress, is to be curious. Can you replace your judgment with curiosity, your opinion with curiosity? Listen, pause, consult. When your child complains about the heat, about getting back to school, that this, whatever it is, I want to be normal. I want to be mainstream. I don't want to be a strange child. Listen, pause, go to your practice, talk to your sponsor, to your friend that you trust, to your therapist, listen to a podcast, read a book, listen, pause, consult, listen to what other adults that you trust have to say. And then you take all of that energy, that time, that information, and you sit with it and you make the adult decision, the parental decision. And remember, there is no should in this work. I don't not use should because it's a tool or a skill. I don't use should because it stopped making sense a long time ago. If that doesn't make sense to you now, try to avoid using should and shouldn't. It's one of the steps, one of the principles in the 8 tools is to avoid imperatives. And watch how your thinking becomes more clear, creative, and disciplined all at the same time. If you choose one path over the other, it'll be a different path. Let your children struggle and gain self-confidence and the resilience that comes from it. I'm going to tell you one other principle that's quite a departure also from the topic, but that's what I'm doing tonight. The mother or the maternal gift is connection, warmth, belonging, love, nurturing. That's the maternal or the mother gift. The mother wound, the shadow side of the mother or the maternal or the feminine wound, is no separate self. The child needs to be, think, and feel what the mother thinks and feels, needs to agree, needs to be sane. In mythology, it's often represented by the mother eating the child. That's the mother wound or the shadow side. The father gift or the paternal gift or the masculine gift is autonomy, empowerment, decisiveness, independence. That's the father's or the paternal gift. These can cross over genders and cross over mother and father roles. And in this, the way that I'm talking, that's just what they're referred to. So the father gift is empowerment, autonomy, a sense of self-efficacy, a clear knowledge of self, or decisiveness. I know what I want. The father wound, or the shadow side, is abandonment. When it goes too far, it's abandonment. If you have a mother wound, it means you don't know who you are. You need somebody to tell you who you are. If you have a father wound, then you're not worthy of love. And we both have a mixture of both, don't we? But it just reminded me of that bullet point of letting them struggle and gain self-confidence, enjoy resilience. I think my weakness as a teacher, as a parent educator, is that I tend to identify with the masculine. I have a strong feminine side also, having been raised by a single mother with a father that wasn't present, that essentially psychologically abandoned us. I have both, of course. All of us have both. But I do see the world through society, through the idea of manhood. I tend to identify more with the masculine characteristics. So letting them struggle and gain self-confidence and enjoy resilience, that's a little bit easier for me. And I could talk about that for an entire webinar and what societal pressures, expectations puts on women and men, mothers and fathers. Ultimately, show your children how to suffer by being willing to tolerate your feelings. And don't confuse your feelings with their feelings. They're not the same. And if you confuse your feelings with their feelings, you have essentially abandoned them because they're not present, because you're projecting too much of yourself onto them and you're trying to take care of them, but you're really taking care of yourself. That phrase is, in a simple sense, the definition of codependency, is taking care of you, or at least the illusion that I'm taking care of you when I'm really taking care of myself. Looks like I've taken the whole hour with all of my detours, so I'm going to just go to the end here. My books are The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You. Both are available on Amazon and on audible.com. I read the second one. We have some new support groups to announce. The next Wilderness Current and Alumni Parent Support Group online is August 12th. That's tomorrow. August 19th. That's tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. We also have a new thing that we're doing where we have alumni-only Wilderness Parent Support Group. So no current families. The next one is August 24th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. And then if you are an intensive alumni, September 14th at 6 p.m. is available. Contact Malia at evoketherapy.com for more information or to register for those. I cannot emphasize enough the power of intensives as a therapy springboard or accelerator. An immersive process. I just finished another private one this week. I can't sell them enough. I can't advocate for them enough. I've told you I've paid for friends, family, employees to go to them. I've been to many myself, mostly individual, and I've been to a couples one also. The next in-person one is September 8th through 12th, Finding You. And we also have an online version, which is September 23rd through 25th. It's half the time, half the program, less than half the cost, much less than half the cost, especially when you count in travel. And then we have, for those of you who have participated in a Finding You, we have a Returning to You, which is kind of our Finding You sequel. That's October 6th through 10th. I and Travis Slagle, so the clinical director of Evoke and the clinical director of intensives, will be running that. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com. I can't think of a better investment, not only just in your life, but in your marriage and also in your child's life, than you doing an intensive. We also have virtual coaching available with our intensive therapists and also with our wilderness therapists and some others. So if you want the Evoke process, you can hire a coach. Just contact Travis at evoketherapy.com to find out about a coach. We have Pursuits Adventure Trips. Somebody told me recently that there's some Facebook online groups where they don't talk about what Evoke does. Evoke was the pioneer in the family work, the family visits, the mid-program visits, the family workshops, the family walkabouts that we do, the Pursuits trips. Pursuits trips are from a 3 to a 30-day process that happen separate from the wilderness program, in addition to the wilderness program, that you can do in between or after or separate from, for families or for young adults. They're customized and all over the world. We ask all current parents to try. Here's that dark forest I was talking about early. To attend any combination of 6 12-step support groups, any combination of Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. You can also go to RefugeRecovery.org or Nominee.org for some other services and support groups in your area that are free of cost. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast platform. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast or go to SoundCloud.com. On Twitter and Instagram, you can find us by searching @Evoke Therapy, or you can find me by searching @drbradreedy.com, DRBRADREEDY. On Instagram, you can also find us by searching @Evoke Therapy Intensives, or on Facebook, you can find Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives by searching those names. And of course, the blog has new content each week. My next broadcast will be August 23rd at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. It'll be a live Q&A. So any questions that I didn't get to this evening, or any that you want to send in before that to webinar@evoketherapy.com, or any that you bring up live, I'll be happy to address any topics or questions then. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for and on behalf of your children. Thank you for making the investment in your mental health, because your mental health has ripple effects to the people that you love, that you work with, that you serve in your life. Take care, folks. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.